Kia ora team, it's Harry again, back with the Distant Veil. Today we're going to be painting the Castigator, one of the Trench Pilgrims from Trench Crusade. First thing we're going to do is going to start off with a black prime, just a nice matte black from a rattle can, and we're going to be doing some stippling. So stippling is when you take a big round soft tipped brush, load it up like you're about to dry brush, although for this being a base coat it's a little heavier than that, and we're just going to basically stab the paintbrush at the model. What this should do is leave more like a bristle tip texture. It's not going to be completely covering, and it's not going to be as smooth as a dry brush would sort of aim to be. And this is going to be a nice way to build up a bit of a sort of dirty fabric texture. So starting with a Mournfang Brown, a nice warm base coat color, and now we're going to come in with a yellow ochre from Vallejo model color, and again same technique, just loading up a little bit on the brush tips and stabbing it into the model. Now you'll see that my brush is not being cleaned in between color changes, and this is just to help starting to blend those colors a little bit while it's inside the actual brush. It just means that although we're jumping up quite a bit with the sort of colors, so the tones on the model, they're not going to appear quite so stark on the model. Coming in for our sort of final highlight of the cloth, being a Sharp T-Bone from Citadel. Again, same technique, load up a little bit on the brush, not cleaning in between. If anything, just adding a little bit of water sometimes to the bristles just helps that paint come off a little bit more easily. And then just stabbing at the model, aiming for the higher parts on the model, just to give it that little bit of a highlight effect. Final highlight being some Brain Matter Beige, this being very much directed just at the very tips of that fabric and the cloth. And if anything, it's starting to be a little bit more of a blend between a stipple and a dry brush at this point. Just making sure that I'm getting the edges of the cloak where I feel like it's going to be a little bit more wear. And then finally just cleaning things up with a little bit of a light dry brush. And you can see here we've picked out quite a lot of detail and got a nice smooth transition between the colors along the fabric. With the fabric finish being base coated at this point, we're just going to start blocking in the wooden components on the model. So that's this big shield here, as well as a few ornaments along the chest, waist and back, as well as the handle of his flail. So for this I'm using a dark warm brown. I typically go for Rhinox hide from the Citadel paint range. It's got a really nice coverage and it's a very subtle warm brown. Covers pretty well and serve the purpose for like a pretty aged sort of wood texture. We'll also be mixing in a little bit of the Mournfang Brown we used as that base coat back at the start. And what I'm doing is along the model just highlighting some bits in the lighter brown, some in the darker brown, and in a few places doing just a quick and dirty wet blend between the two. So just having that little bit of variety helps to bake the model up. And with the blending, it's not particularly clean at this point. We will be doing an oil wash down the track, which is much more forgiving when it comes to hiding a bit of sort of blocky blends, and having that variety on the wood is going to make the model a lot more interesting down the track. So I just want to point out now just one of the places I'm doing a bit of a wet blend on these wooden components, and this is on one of the back panels on the model. Now wet blending can sound pretty intimidating to someone who's quite new to painting, but really all we're doing is blocking on 2 blobs of wet paint and then just using a wet brush just to mix the paint along the edges where they meet. And really, it's basically just mixing paint on the model rather than on your palette. It gives a nice organic transition between two colors, and if you're feeling like the sort of blend is not smooth enough, or maybe it's pushing too far in one color more than the other, all you need to do is just come back through with a bit more of the paint you want to be coming through a bit stronger, and again layering that over top, cleaning the brush and just adding a bit of water just to kind of work over that transition line. It's one of those techniques which looks really fancy and technical as an end product, but the actual basic foundational technique is really dead simple. For the few leather components on the model, I've grabbed a Scrag Brown from the Citadel paint range. It's a really bright orange, bright brown, nearly orange color, and it's just going to make those leather components stand out a little bit stronger from the wood parts, whilst still being in the same color spectrum. With that base color now down on the browns, we're going to come through and start our highlighting process. For the wood shield and a few of the other sort of pouches and panels along the model, they've got some very nice edges, so I'm just going to come through with one of my dry brushes and just do a bit of a combination of a stipple and a dry brush, just to, again, build up a bit of texture along the wood features and give a bit of definition and shape. Now what I'll be doing is taking those base colors that I've already worked with and just working in a little bit of the Sharp Debone to bring up that highlight color, whilst also not disrupting the rest of the model's colors, as I'm being a bit heavy-handed with the brushwork. It just makes sure that you don't have to be too neat. But what that will do is it will make everything look quite pale and washed out. So I'm going to come back through with a mahogany brown, the Air variety specifically, because it works really nicely as a sort of pseudo wash speed paint. You just got to water it down, about 3 parts water, 1 part paint, and you can use this to reintroduce that saturation and color. It will also help to tie a few of those different wood and leather components together a bit more tightly, whilst still giving a bit of variety. If you feel like you're ever being a little too heavy-handed with washes like this, just come through with a wet brush and clean up anything that looks a little bit too strongly like the wash tone. It's a nice way to add a little bit of variety again to those browns that can look pretty samey same if you're not too careful. But also I have very unsteady hands and often will end up painting parts that I don't want to be painting. And a bit of water just cleans that all up, provided that you are quick with getting it on. You don't need to rush, it has a bit of a dry time, but the sooner you get to it, the easier it is to clean. And that's basically the wood and leather components finished at this point until we come through for the oil wash. For the face panel, I wanted to make that stand out a little bit, and most of the colors on the model so far are in that very sort of warm browny yellow spectrum. So I wanted to come through with something quite different, and I've reached for a really, really dark desaturated blue-black almost. I put it on and you can see here it stands out like nobody's business, and that's just that sort of brain trying to work out why this color is so different. So I've mixed in a little bit of acrylic black ink to help darken that down even more so, and I'm just going to be using this almost like a reverse layering semi-wash. So I've watered it down, but I'm aiming mostly for the lower or recessed components. It's a nice way to do your highlighting in reverse, but I really want to tone down that blue so it's a little less jarring, and build up a little bit of shadow just to help that faceplate and nozzle stand out from the model without washing out too much with the black ink. With that base coat now dark enough, I'm going to start highlighting it up. Now what I'm going to do is mix in some Administratum Grey from Citadel into my darkened down color mix. And what that's going to do is it's going to make it almost like a pale grey, but still keep that little bit of sort of blue texture to the paint. And I'm just being very restrained with the highlights here. Again, because we will be doing an oil wash, we can afford to push the highlights a bit higher than you normally would. It just means that when you come through and clean up the oil wash later on, you don't need to be quite as clean and tidy with it. But again, I'm going to be fairly restrained on this one. I don't want the brightness to stand out too strongly at this point in time. Next thing we're going to move on to now is painting up the hands on the shield. So for that, I'm just going to take a tanned flesh tone from the Army Painter, and I'm going to mix this up in a fairly thin consistency. I'm just going to gently build up some layers, basically using the wood brown as my darkest flesh tone. And then because these are dead and bloodless hands, we will be mixing in a little bit of brain matter beige as our highlight tone, and just working up to being a very, very pale flesh color. Again, if there's no blood in human body parts, a lot of that rich redness will wash out. It'll still have a bit of a color to it, but we want this to be very sort of corpse gray almost as a final highlight. Taking care not to work any of that sort of flesh tone on the wood paneling, but again, if it does hit the odd spot, it's not the end of the world. Again, with that oil wash, it's going to be very forgiving of any mistakes down the track. With the hands finished, I'm just going to have a quick look around the model and see if there's anything that needs to be cleaned up at this point. And there's just a couple of little patches around the wood and leather. I just want to come through with a wet brush and a little bit of very, very thinned down brown, just to almost panel line and break up some of that texture, so that lack of texture, and help add a little bit of extra definition and hide some spilled over paint here and there. Now I'm going to move on to working on the fur cap. For a base color, I'm coming in with the Administratum Grey I already have on the palette here. I'm just going to start blocking in what I want to be that sort of brighter white fur, cleaning up the odd little overpainting area with some of the Rhinox hide that I've got there. And then for our first highlight step, I'm going to mix in a little bit of brain matter beige to the Administratum Grey, and just very gently with a flat brush, almost dry brush that onto the raised edges of that fur texture. Being very gentle, I don't want it to be a super strong highlight, but just enough to highlight that there is some textural sort of sculpting on the cap on this model. Now, after staring at this model for far too long, I felt like the cap wasn't showing enough of the detail, so I've come in with that Rhinox hide that I've already got on the palette, watered it right down into a wash consistency, and then I come back in with the brain matter beige and Administratum Grey on the dry brush, and just going to highlight it back up again. And I think it helps make that texture pop a little more and helps to frame the hat as being a separate piece. Now I've got most of the normal acrylic painting done on the model. I'm going to move on to some metallics, switching out for one of my less nice brushes. I've got a nice Kalinsky Sable that I don't really want those mica flakes settling into, so I'm just pulling out just a cheap synthetic brush, working in a little bit of black ink to my plate mail air from the Army Painter. I'm going to be using this as my silver base coat for the flail as well as the nails in the shield. Now to add some variety to the metallics, I'm going to be mixing in a Balthazar Gold, and I'll be using this to highlight some of the brass or gold components that I think should be on the model. So for that, I'm aiming mostly for the crucifix on the back plate, the cross on the hat, and the little Metachrist on his cross on the shield. And as often is the case whenever I'm filming myself painting, I've realized I've missed a detail somewhere. So there are actually a set of candles on the shield. So I'm going to come back in and paint those up real quick before I do any more of the metallics. So for the candles I'm using is the yellow ochre that I used on the cloth to start with, and then highlighting it up with a 50-50 mix of the yellow ochre and Prey Meta Beige. Now that little sidebar is finished up, I'm going to come through and start highlighting the metallics. So for that, I'm just going to get some of the pure plate mail air that I used for the base coating, but not mixing in the black acrylic ink. I'm just going to work some sort of rough volumetric highlights, or sort of roughly hitting where the actual metallic is already shining on the model under the light, as well as the higher points on the nails and other little bits along the weapon. Now for the brass and gold highlights, I'm using Greedy Gold from the Army Painter. This is a very, very thin gold paint, so it's really hard to use as a base coat. It will, however, run really nicely over that Balthazar Gold. I'm just going to be dry brushing this a little bit because I don't want the highlights to be too sharp on the few bits that I have painted this different color. However, because it is a dry brush, I just need to be very careful that I'm not highlighting that metallic onto some of the wooden components. And again, I'm going to come back through with some of those darker browns and just clean up a couple of the mistakes that I've made along the way before we come in and do a little bit of cleanup work and add a bit of a wash tone to the rest of the metallics. So for that, I am going to be using Dark Tone by the Army Painter and just using it on the lower components of the silver, so I'm not doing an all over wash, just a sort of restrained wash, and then a flesh tone for the brass and gold components. For that one there, I'm a little heavier on it because I do want to just bring that sheen down a little bit and make it just look a little less clean and new. And with that, you could very much just stop here. It's a very well painted model, but I want to try something different. Trench Crusade is priding itself on being classic Grimdark, and the easiest way that you can get that look is with an oil wash. Now for an oil wash, what you're going to need to do to protect your paint is cover your entire mini in a gloss varnish. This will do two things. It'll stop the mineral spirits from eating away at your acrylic paints underneath, but it's also going to help make the oil paint run into recesses and settle a lot more easily. Now I have not splashed out on oil paints here. I have got the cheapest of cheap oil paints that I could find, and I've mixed it in probably like a 1:8 ratio of white spirit or mineral spirit, depending on where you live, in with the oil paint, and I've chosen a burnt umber. Now again, I'm looking at this and going, it's a little too bright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix in a little bit of black oil paint just to darken it down, and then I'm going to come through and do an all over wash again. So what's nice about the oil paint is that whilst the mineral spirit does evaporate fairly quickly, so it only takes maybe a minute or two to be touch dry, the actual oil itself is very easily reactivated with using the sort of mineral spirits just on a cotton pad or a Q-tip. So once it's dry and it looks really gross and dirty, you can come back through and clean up the model quite selectively and almost paint in reverse. So having all those layers underneath, you can then reveal the parts that you want to be a little bit better. So this is it before we start cleaning it up. You can see everything's been toned right down. You can still see a little bit of the gloss from the drying spirit. Now I come in with the white spirit on a Q-tip, and I'm just very gently working it over the dirty bits to reveal that color underneath. And the Q-tip's going to do two things. It's going to wick away some of the paint, but it's also going to help put a little extra white spirit to help it pull a little bit better in those dark areas. So again, it helps that wash settle down in the cracks and crevices, as well as removing it from the top surfaces. The only thing you have to be a little bit aware of is if you work away too much, it's going to reveal that sort of gloss varnish underneath. And I made the mistake of then going back through and covering the whole thing in a matte varnish, which kind of defeats the purpose of using true metallic paints. It pretty much kills the mica shine, but you live and you learn, and I will make sure that I have a different method of toning that down next time. Hey team, thanks for watching along to the end. I hope you enjoyed me trying out a few new things. I haven't done oil washes before today, and I can see the benefits. I can also see where I've made a couple of mistakes that I want to work on for some of the Trench Pilgrims I will be painting up in future. If you really like this, the best way to support us is like it, comment, share it around, and if you want to see more things like that, like this, let us know. We will be doing a bit of a Trench Crusade kick over the next few weeks, so if you want something else, maybe let us know what you want us to paint up next. Until the next time though, I'll catch you around.